Global warming has reached an alarming level. Looking for the reasons for rising CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, researchers have now picked up a new trail. The forgotten chance for the world's climate sits here, just a few decimeters below us. There is a close relationship between soil quality and the climate, something that received all too little attention to date. Detailed analysis of the soil only began recently. Here the focus is on how soil breathes, how it absorbs carbon. Because a good soil rich in humus is one of the most important accumulators of CO2. In the course of the Earth's history, nature has always simply turned surplus CO2 into biomass. Today, that no longer seems to work. Why is that? Dry studies of this kind deliver valuable data on CO2 absorption capacity under certain conditions. Soil goes online. Yet we're still far from understanding the rich variety of life within. To date, arable soil has often been perceived merely as a foundation for plant growth. Ever more involved measures are taken in agriculture in order to produce the highest possible yields. So far, there's been hardly any discussion of the effects of intensive cultivation on soils or climate. But now, in a race against time that global warming demands we win, we can no longer sidestep these crucial questions. Upon closer examination, we find that almost everywhere, the quality of soil has reached an alarming state. Humus, which had been there originally, has been oxidized to CO2.
Und unsere Böen in Europa, die Ackerböen.
And our soil in Europe, the arable land, has on average 4 kilos of carbon bound organically. And according to international nomenclature, up to 5 kilograms of carbon, the soil is described as desert. This means that all of our European farmland is desert. So the first thing is to accept that. Yet people are trying to camouflage it.
Und das wird also versucht zu vertuschen.
All over the earth during past decades, there's been a stealthy destruction of valuable farmland. What caused this dramatic development, of which we are aware today, and which is jointly and decisively responsible for the threat of a climate catastrophe? And what must we do better in order to seize the great climate chance that lies beneath us? Overpopulation, air pollution, mountains of rubbish, huge amounts of traffic, reckless exploitation of valuable resources. Now nature has man under siege. The number of climate refugees has already been estimated at 20 million. These developments force us to seek a better understanding and consideration of cycles in the great ecosystem Earth. In nature, carbon is not only present in the atmosphere. We can find large amounts also in the ocean, in vegetation, and bound in the soil. Yet this was hardly considered over the last 100 years. Monocultures and intensively farmed land led to accelerating yields, but not without consequences. Over the past 60 years, agriculture released almost as much CO2 worldwide, as did fossil-fueled energy consumption due to coal, oil, and natural gas, more than 19 billion tons per year. Soil originally rich in humus massively lost quality, and can no longer serve as a CO2 accumulator. Florian Amlinger, an advisor to the Austrian Ministry of Food, reflects.
Heute ist der Boden eine Netto-Kohlenstoffquelle. Das heißt, produziert oder emittiert.
Today, soil is a net source of carbon, which means that it produces or emits more carbon than it binds each year. Another interesting figure is that the soil stores almost twice as much carbon as the total in the atmosphere. This basically means that the soil is a powerful carbon store. The question now is, how can we compensate, at least in part, for the annually increasing amount of CO2 in our atmosphere by appropriate cultivation of the soil?
Durch entsprechende Bodenbewirtschaftung zumindest zu einem Teil kompensieren.
This has turned out to be the key question for climate protection. Because despite all the measures and political declarations of intent to date, it has not proven possible to decrease the CO2 level in the atmosphere. The collapse of the climate is drawing ever closer. We're on course for a global catastrophe. Since the 1950s, farmland all over the world has been treated intensively with artificially produced mineral fertilizer in order to increase plant growth.
In der Sowjetunion liegt jetzt der Ton auf der chemischen Industrie.
This fertilization provided plants with all the necessary nutrient elements, such as nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other compounds, in a targeted way.
Hormone gegen Unkraut. Und das Geheimnis der hohen Erträge ist der Kunstdünger.
The concept seemed to work. Soon farmers were convinced of the artificial fertilizer as miracle cure.
Die Mechanisierung der österreichischen Landwirtschaft macht weiterhin rasende Fortschritte.
Until recently, scarcely anyone was interested in knowing what this kind of cultivation meant for life in the soil and the quality of humus, or indeed the effect on CO2 storage capacity. Today, in many places, agriculture resembles a major industry. Increasingly powerful machinery is used. Some 140 million tons of fertilizer are shoved into the soil worldwide, most of it in China, the US, and India. Yields are still satisfactory, but the soil is destroyed. And additionally, critics demand that the immense damage done to national economics should also be included in the equation. Damage that is created in the wake of CO2 emissions in intensive agriculture as a result of seedbed preparation, weed control, fertilization, and plant protection. Exploitation of soil has contributed considerably to the fact that nature can no longer deal with the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere. Intensively farmed land has also seen a major decrease in its water retention capacity and is at extreme risk of erosion. Heavy downpours, occurring ever more frequently as a result of climate change, lead to yet more removal of humus. Rainfall washes valuable nutrients away. At the same time, the soil loses its water retention capacity and the facility to cool the land through evaporation. As a result, there are strong downpours, floods, and periods of drought.
All problems we see today can be explained by the humus climate theory, and the solution is in fact a new kind of ecological agriculture that builds up humus.
Today we know that cooling the land by means of evaporation is one of the most important climatic tasks of soil. But the world beneath our feet holds yet more secrets. In French Guiana, soil scientists have made a sensational discovery. In the savannas of the coastal region, which were regularly flooded, they found some important remnants of the activities of native Indians, who had lived there approximately 1,200 years before, in a region that is extremely prone to erosion. If forest is felled here, deep erosion of soil follows rapidly. Here, scientists are researching how it was that the Indians back then were nevertheless able to manage erosion-resistant and sustainably fertile soil in this area of high rainfall. Delphine Renard is one of the researchers who are trying to solve this mystery. Researchers are faced with the fact that there are hill-and-bed structures here, which were created by human beings and have survived a whole millennium despite rainfall of more than 3 meters per year. Analyzing this old knowledge might deliver new findings for building up healthy, sustainably fertile soils. Archaeological discoveries indicate that these were high beds used for agriculture. Evidently, what the Indians created and abandoned centuries ago for unknown reasons was brought to perfect completion and then continued by nature. Erosion-resistant farmland was created, which remained fertile for centuries till the present day. Healthy soil in an inhospitable area, a living laboratory for researchers.
Le but du projet qui se déroule ici en Guyane française est d'essayer de comprendre à la fois les composantes historiques.
The main objective of the project here in French Guiana is trying to understand the historical and ecological meaning of the hill fields. We are researching who farmed these fields, which also served to protect against flooding, and what was grown. This cultivation was abandoned by man just under 1,000 years ago, but it has been taken over by natural systems. Earthworms, ants and termites carry organic and mineral material to the hills, thereby protecting them from erosion. Their activities have ensured that these hills have remained so well preserved till the present day.
Maintiennent ces buts contre l'érosion. C'est pourquoi on peut encore les voir très bien aujourd'hui.
Farmland, which has remained stable and fertile for a millennium, even in extreme rainfall conditions. Here, this harmony between nature and cultivation was once realized. What can we learn from this?
People created these mounds, they created heterogeneity, and it transformed ecosystem functioning. It didn't destroy ecosystem functioning. It created something that wasn't there before. And what this means is that if we are clever enough, if we domesticate nature wisely, as some people would phrase it, we can shape ecosystems that can combine the capacity to produce food with the maintenance of ecosystem services and biodiversity. So I think this is a very positive message.
The researchers are impressed by the processes that seem to organize themselves in this soil ecosystem. It is stabilized not only by a high density of roots, but also by organic plant material, which is brought to the mounds by leafcutter ants. Soil scientists in the Amazonas area of Brazil have made a potentially more decisive discovery for saving the world's climate. Here, too, a kind of super soil was created, which has been fertile for 2,000 years, the famous Terra Preta. Evidently, the ancient inhabitants of the Amazonas had made sensible use of their resources. Waste such as fish and animal bones, and their own excretions, had been mixed with carbonized residues and inserted into the soil. With this recipe, more and more nutrients accumulated in the soil. Today, the black earth reaches often more than 1 meter deep into the soil. Similar black earth soil, such as that in Brazil, has now also been discovered in some places in Germany. Dr. Bruno Glaser, soil scientist at Bayreuth University, is analyzing it.
The main result of these analyses was that highly aromatic stable carbon, so-called black carbon, though one might also call it charcoal or charcoal residues, was the reason for the soil being fertile, and that humus had remained stable in this soil for 2,000 years.
The carbonization of biomass is a decisive factor for sustainable soil fertility. Terra preta is stable, rich in nutrients, and an excellent water store. Yet one finds such soil only in isolated locations, near old human settlements. In this excavation, no black earth was discovered. The astonishing ecosystem of the Earth, as we know it today, needed an immensely long time for its development. The creation of that thin, fertile layer of soil on which our lives depend is a complex process involving many stages. Moist, sandy soils form the basis for the roots of flora. Lichens, the pioneers of vegetation, settle on naked rocks and digest minerals. Today, this process can still be observed in nature. However, it's a long way from lichens and mosses to the mighty layers of humus in good soils, involving the activity of countless tiny forms of life. On closer examination, the soil reveals itself to be an enormously varied universe in miniature. And the idea that this is dead material is utterly misguided. Countless microbes are found under the microscope. Under the right conditions, a single bacterium can produce millions of offspring within 2 days. The fertility of the soil is dependent on these life forms. Every effort is made here in the Styrian Keindorf ecological region to put all the latest knowledge about the significance of the soil into practice. At the International Humus Symposium, which takes place here on a regular basis, experts from all parts of the world exchange research results about the soil and the climate. It's above all farmers who need to be convinced of the possibilities that exist for pursuing new, environmentally friendly paths in agriculture. Practice is hot on the tracks of theory. Trial fields in Keindorf provide opportunities for targeted large-scale humus development tests. Because there's no doubt that this is what's needed right now. Forward-looking agriculture is faced with a number of critical questions. How can soil quality be improved? Soil organisms promoted? How can the soil be turned into a long-term carbon reservoir? One answer to all of these questions is compost. Because all over the world, enormous quantities of raw organic materials are piling up and are still being treated as waste, despite the plain fact that, in reality, they are valuable raw materials. These organic materials could be making a significant contribution to the efficient development of humus if they were collected and given targeted preliminary treatment. The essential requirement is, however, the know-how for turning the substances available at the start of the process into a stable form of carbon, because not every form of compost is valuable for the soil and the climate.
Unfortunately, a focus on the idea of waste disposal still dominates in the world of composting at the present time. This must change in future. The product itself will be the important thing in future, and this means that the task at hand is to bind as much carbon as possible in the form of humus, because once correctly bound, it is stable in this form for hundreds of years.
Here, trial fields are being supplied with large quantities of specially prepared compost in order to significantly improve the quality of the soil. The first results are highly promising. Compost-fertilized soils are more rich in humus, less dense, and stay fertile on a sustainable basis. The development of these test fields has been monitored by scientists for years, and the result? Correct composting is a valuable contributor to climate protection. Long-term field trials, which began in the Upper Lobau near Vienna in 1992, yielded the same results. Here too, both the humus content and the fertility of the soil increased significantly as a result of managed composting. The experience the researchers have gathered here is of the greatest significance in the face of foreseeable climate changes.
Klimaveränderungen werden in Zukunft
Climate changes will result in more frequent, very heavy precipitation events in future, but this will also be coupled with more frequent periods of drought. How can we begin to make our soils fit for a situation like this? One key to this is increasing the humus content according to local and cultivation conditions.
The field trials in Lobau were accompanied by laboratory analyses. These brought to light the fact that composting is not only of value to the soil and climate, but it also produces more valuable harvests.
It was demonstrated that humus content can be increased over the long term. Improvements were achieved not only in harvest yields, but also in harvest stability, and the quality of the produce was improved.
Composting is a step in the direction of a healthy, closed-loop flow economy. This follows the example of nature in which there's no waste. All dead material decomposes and is reused. At the University of Natural Resources and Applied Life Sciences in Vienna, quality of humus and composts is being investigated on the basis of humic acid content. Valuable raw materials could be won by means of more effective collection.
Just how important the separated collection of biogenic wastes and their composting is may possibly be made clear by the following example. If such a compost containing 50% of its organic material as humic acid were to be spread on all the cultivated land of Austria, then Austria would be able to fulfill all the requirements of the Kyoto Protocol.
Humus and compost quality has become a significant factor in the race against climate change. Until very recently, no quality criterion existed at all for soils. They were simply considered to be good when it could be shown that they contained only few pollutants. Intensive research on the relationship between the soil and the climate is also being carried out at the Technical University of Munich.
A further important factor of influence on the humus and carbon content of the soil is fertilization. Organic fertilizers need to be mentioned first and foremost in this context. This entire issue is not just a problem of quantity, namely how much organic fertilizer should I use. It is far more a problem of quality. Also at issue is the quality of the organic material. Here, once again, ecological cultivation tends to have significant starting advantages, because the basic issue here is very often the creation of organic fertilizers of very high quality.
How does one achieve a soil that is healthy and rich in humus? That is a question that has occupied leading composting consultants for decades. Here, many of today's agricultural methods come in for criticism.
The soil is the digestive organ, the stomach of growing plants. When this stomach is overloaded, the soil suffers from diarrhea and the plant has problems. And where do all the poisons end up? In the groundwater. So we're left with groundwater problems, while the aerobic microflora also has serious difficulties of its own. The earthworm, for example, does not feel at all well when it is doused in slurry. The poor creature must come up into the air, otherwise it'll die. The upshot is, we're practically destroying the living portion of the soil.
One could achieve long-term promotion of life in the soil through correctly prepared compost. But we also need comprehensive knowledge about the smallest life forms in the soil.
These aerobic life forms have similar needs to those of human beings and the larger animals. They need oxygen, they need food, they need water. And when the essential conditions are present, these organisms deal with the organic constituents of the soil in an optimal manner. This means there are no losses.
There is an immeasurable universe at our feet. 2 grams of soil can contain more living entities than there are people on the earth. Bacteria, molds, algae, monocellular organisms. These all play their part in the development of nutrients for the plants. If composting is done wrongly, up to 90% of the organic substances that can aid soil development are lost in an uncontrolled process of decay. Farmers attend seminars to collect information about the complex interrelationships. For farmers, knowledge of how important soil quality is for the climate opens up prospects for financial support.
Negotiations are going on for the post-2012 period, and it would be great if soil management, grassland and cropland management was included.
A random sample comparison. The difference in quality between an average field and one that has been treated with compost is readily recognizable. Compared with dead soils, which are frequently the result of intensive agriculture, living soils clearly differ in that they are a habitat for large numbers of earthworms. Earthworms are of the greatest importance. Through their excretions, they build up humus. At the same time, they ventilate the soil, with the result that other organisms can proliferate with greater ease. Whilst it is necessary to fight to achieve fertile soils in Europe in the presence of relatively favorable climatic conditions, here in the middle of the Egyptian desert, a veritable miracle has taken place. On the Sekhem farms near Cairo, flourishing gardens have been created, capable of resisting all manner of storms and periods of drought with extreme temperatures. The secret of this oasis is an ingenious system of compost management. Gradually, a 30-centimeter layer of humus has been successfully built up here on the desert surface, thereby creating good conditions for plants to thrive. Now on the Sekhem main farm, some 2,000 people work in production facilities that all operate according to biodynamic principles.
Gesündere Pflanzen bedeutet gesündere Tiere und gesunde Menschen.
Healthy plants mean healthy animals and healthy people. And this process, which we initiated in Egypt 30 years ago, is in full swing today. So much so that a large number of people also receive deliveries of compost from us and have learned for themselves how to make compost. And organic farming is proliferating rapidly in Egypt.
Vermehrt sich rasant in Ägypten.
The compost ensures that the soil holds water as well as it can. Thus, this area of extremely low rainfall has become significantly less dependent on deep wells. The CO2 level in the compost is regularly investigated. All available materials are used for composting: garden waste, rice straw, bio-waste, animal manure, and sediment from the Nile. Investigations of soil quality form the basis for further projects in the Egyptian desert. The treatment of manure from cattle farming has proven to be especially important. Before use, it is aerated for several days, whilst it also receives additives, including algae, with important mineral salts and specific microorganisms. Only then are the plants treated with this carefully prepared and nourishing mixture. Substances from animals are very important for soil quality. Droppings from pigeon keeping are also used. Of course, manure from cattle farming is even more important for composting. In turn, the animals benefit from production waste from the orange juice press. More than 200 other Egyptian farms, having a total of 4,000 hectares of organically cultivated land, now deliver their products here for further processing or distribution. In many countries, there are now customers for the spices, herbs, fruit, and seeds from Sechem farms. The Sechem project originally became well known for its championing of organic cotton, which is used to produce clothing here. Inspired by this farm's example, the application of spraying throughout Egypt has been reduced by a factor of 10. Fertile soil helping to provide a lush microclimate in the middle of the desert. Sechem proves that humus generation can also succeed even in the most difficult conditions. Initiatives for further trials at the Sechem project are also coming from here in Western Styria. The Mixed Cultivation Recycling Economy Working Group conducts research into plant combinations with beneficial effects on the soil. Because the strategic, simultaneous planting of a variety of plants that complement each other favorably brings a whole set of decisive advantages. Mixed cultivation can be an important factor for humus generation. Soil organisms are healthier, plant diseases can be better prevented, water retention capacity is doubled, and good root penetration stores a great deal of CO2 in the soil. It will scarcely be possible to combat the problems in the soil without creative new methods of cultivation. Comparisons over periods of many years have clearly shown that ecological cultivation not only delivers stable crop yields, but also a great potential for carbon storage and reduced emissions of greenhouse gases. So, agriculture is standing at the crossroads. If we continue to ignore the critical significance of soil quality and carry on with intensively farmed monocultures, the problems with the climate can only get worse.
Und es hat sich nun gezeigt, dass es wirklich möglich ist.
It transpires that it really is possible to raise carbon levels significantly over a period of 10 to 15 years. And, moreover, that there is a whole set of financial advantages too, relating to general soil fertility and consequent yield capacity.
Angeht, die Ertragsfähigkeit.
One particular bio-pioneer, now known throughout the German-speaking world, is Sepp Braun, with his exemplary farm in Freising. Amongst other things, he champions a complementary form of cattle rearing and field cultivation, and works very closely with scientists.
I've been farming organically for 20 years, and previously I had a conventional intensive field cultivation operation. To me, it's simply clear that if one takes the time to learn about nature and the laws of nature, it's fascinating what it can do. What I mean is that nature has capabilities that we never noticed so far, just because we thought we must be the masters of nature.
The motto goes like this: don't make something out of nature, but rather together with her. Crop rotation, mixed cultivation, composting, avoiding readily soluble mineral fertilizers, minimal tillage. Using measures like these yields sustainable humus generation. In most of today's arable soil, the plant's roots reach only as far as the plow sole. In contrast, they can spread more deeply in soil that is handled carefully, and such fields are therefore less susceptible to erosion. Good root penetration helps to loosen the soil and improves the supply of nutrients to the plants. Soil organisms thrive, and the mass of roots stores a substantial amount of carbon. Scientific studies have proven the serious effects that type of cultivation has on soil organisms. Work at Graz University of Technology has established significant changes in microbiology associated with intensive cultivation.
Agriculture has naturally also left a trail in its wake that influences microorganisms in the soil. On the one hand, that has led to a lower diversity in populations of microorganisms overall, with the effect that, quite simply, fewer microorganisms are available to carry out certain functions. Whilst on the other hand, there is an increased incidence of pathogens, meaning, for example, that there has been a drastic growth in pathogens that are generated in the soil and contribute to reduced yields.
Just as in the human body, so in weakened soil, dangerous pathogens can get the upper hand and cause serious damage. Also, as in the case of human health, for the soil too, the correct delivery of nutrition and good handling are crucial aspects of preventative treatment. On these trial fields belonging to the Technical University of Munich, they're investigating the development of humus and carbon content in a variety of soils. Here it has become clear that, in practice, it really is possible to drive carbon levels in the soil upward over a period of several years. All over the world, people are looking for methods of rapid humus generation. Does Terra Preta research offer a solution? Here, charcoal is being prepared for a large-scale composting trial. The goal is to convert what has been learnt from research on the black earth in Amazonia into practical application in Europe. Charcoal is being processed with garden and organic waste, along with sewage sludge. Smaller-scale trials carried out at the University of Bayreuth have already demonstrated the effectiveness of this charcoal, known internationally as biochar. The plants delivered significantly higher yields when biochar was mixed in with the compost.
Here we're looking at a plant trial with biochar compost, two different types of ground with oats. On the right is sandy soil, on the left it's loamy. One can see very clearly that if one applies no biochar, little biochar, lots of biochar, that biochar is indeed promoting growth on both types of soil.
Measuring, recording, determining the yield of each plant. Only a process as scrupulous as this can deliver clear scientific conclusions about the effectiveness of biochar. Accompanying laboratory analyses aim to help answer the critical question regarding the extent to which it is possible sustainably to raise the fertility of soil by means of pyrolyzed substances. Meanwhile, in Ingelheim am Rhein, it has been possible to develop a pyrolysis reactor to readiness for series production, the most important step towards the synthesis of biochar. Here, garden waste, colza cake, and indeed sewage sludge are being processed. In contrast with combustion, during carbonization, only part of the CO2 from the biomass escapes to the atmosphere. A large proportion remains bound in this product for the long term. This is the generation of that sought-after biochar. The carbonization process offers new possibilities for recycling wood. Gasification facilities could be converted to biochar production. The advantages of this new carbonization process are clear. Burning fossil fuels releases additional carbon into the atmosphere and damages the climate. The familiar problems get worse. Using biomass is neutral in terms of the circulation of CO2. But producing biochar has a beneficial effect on the climate. Carbonization binds around a third of the carbon in a stable form, thereby reducing the burden on the atmosphere. biochar has proven to be an outstanding raw material. Building up artificial terra preta could open up new dimensions for soil fertility and the binding of CO2. Soil conservation is the principal aim of climate-oriented agriculture. In southern Brazil, for some years now, they've been following a radical direction. The farmers' fazendas in Vitmarsum form part of a total of around 20 million hectares of land on which so-called zero tillage is practiced. This concept has enjoyed long-term success both in Brazil and Argentina. These Brazilian farmers did not change over to this soil-conserving approach entirely of their own free will. Conventional intensive cultivation had destroyed their soil over the decades. Today, they favor a revolutionary concept.
We have
a planned crop rotation in which we plant crops but do not harvest them. The purpose is to leave a good layer of straw on the land. When we do harvest crops, again, the straw is always left on top, so that the ground is always covered. Ever since the changeover to this soil-conserving concept, yields have been rising continuously, between 35% and 80% over past decades. None of the farmers wants to go back to the days of intensive cultivation. Here, the plow serves as nothing more than a museum exhibit. It is a relic from a time of misguided development that led to enormous problems with soil erosion.
Solo arenoso deve ter de 60% acima de areia.
On sandy soil, here it consists of about 60% sand, and our undulating landscape, after a number of years we noticed the first furrows after the rains. Given our climatic conditions, it is altogether possible that the ground will still be saturated from one period of rain and then another large downpour comes over a short period. That's what's caused erosion. Soil loss only became really destructive when we started planting soya. That was in the 1970s.
A partir do advento da soja, ou seja, nos anos 70.
Today, the problem has been overcome. The straw stays on the ground after the harvest, and its decay supports the development of soil organisms. Machines are only required for sowing. Plowing is avoided with so-called direct planting.
I can certainly say that the demand for direct planting is on the rise. In Brazil, in America, all over the world. In Europe, they're also admitting that the soil has lost organic material as a result of frequent ploughing.
Doing business with nature is always based on closed-loop material cycles, the opposite of what characterizes our throwaway society. In the Brazilian city of Maringá, population close to 330,000, they're attempting to master the refuse problem with new technology. Given that not even separate collection is the norm here, and 65% of refuse is bio-waste. The town produces 300 tons of refuse per day. Now, with the aid of an accelerated composting process, the recyclable material is turned into much sought-after fertilizer.
Com esse tratamento nós estamos fazendo a compostagem acelerada da.
This waste treatment includes accelerated composting of organic material. As a result, we achieve production of 110 tons of humus per day.
110 toneladas de humus, de adubo por dia.
That means that 41% of the solid urban refuse that comes to us is left over as humus at the end of the process and can be used for agriculture.
No final do processo, 41% disso é humus, é adubo que pode ser utilizado na agricultura.
Perhaps climate-oriented cultivation will soon be characterized by structures that bring together agriculture and forestry. In France, agroforestry cultivation has been successful for years. Trees offer fields protection against wind and erosion and deliver carbon to the ground by means of their massive roots. But the farmer also enjoys economic advantages. In addition to the annual grain, he can also fell valuable wood after a few decades, thereby doubling the total financial gain.
Ces systèmes ont des avantages également pour l'environnement. Donc pas seulement pour le revenu, mais également pour l'environnement.
These agroforestry systems have commercial and at the same time ecological advantages. For example, the blossoms on the trees attract insects. The insects help us to keep control of lice that like to invade cultivated grain. This reduces the use of pesticides.
Les insectes reviennent, pondent leurs œufs sur les céréales et les larves détruisent les pucerons, ce qui nous limite l'utilisation de pesticides.
In these agroforests, the competition for light between trees and grain tends to make the wheat ripen somewhat later, but it's of better quality. Significantly higher protein levels have been recorded. Meanwhile, the trees drive their roots deeper in a field of grain. They grow more rapidly and are resistant to dehydration in the summer. The deeper roots also allow them to absorb more nitrogen, which would be unavailable to the grain plants with their flat root systems. So it is that the trees contribute to the protection of groundwater. Those who have practiced this for many years are convinced of the advantages of agroforests, and the aesthetic aspect of these systems awakens many people's interest.
Des gens qui s'interrogent, qui se demandent pourquoi il y a des arbres, à quoi ça sert, etc. Donc ça, c'est sûr que ça...
People ask themselves why I plant the trees, what purpose they serve. It puzzles them. My response is to take them along to the fields, guide them around the landscape, and explain what it's about. If they understand it, then they too become advocates of this type of cultivation.
Such agroforestry systems are still generally the exception, but the threat of an impending collapse of the climate could lead to a rapid uptake of such mixed cultivation. In many European agricultural landscapes, the degradation and destruction of the soil is not yet evident, superficially at least. The outwardly visible beauty of the landscape often belies the fact that there is an urgent need for action. Sustainably healthy soil can only be achieved through the deliberate generation of humus. And only soil that is rich in humus can make a decisive contribution to saving our climate through its ability to store carbon. 19 billion tons of CO2 could be trapped by the world's agricultural land. This enormous potential is available for 30 years. Agriculture is still in a deep rut. Heavy machines and events like this plowing championship, notwithstanding the capabilities on show, bear witness to an attitude that must be challenged anew. Is it only about squeezing a yield out of the natural environment? Or are we prepared to learn from Mother Nature and work with her? There are solutions for agriculture that are oriented towards future climate protection. Now, it's all about implementing them effectively.